2013, Kevin Smith, director of films like Clerks, Mallrats, and Red State, comes across a creepy story on Twitter involving a room listing. Free room in a nice house on the condition that the tenant occasionally dresses up as a walrus. Completely fascinated by this story, he runs an online poll on whether or not he should make this into a movie. #WalrusYes. A year later, the movie's finished, and this is the first installment to Kevin Smith's True North trilogy, followed by Yoga Hosers, Moose Jaws, and distributed by A24. The anti-hero, Wallace, is played by Justin Long. I say this because you kind of immediately find out that this guy is sort of a jerk. He has a podcast with his BFF named Teddy, played by Haley Joel Osment, aka Sora, aka I See Dead People, where they view viral fail videos and make fun of the people in them. They call this podcast the Nazi Podcast. You have to spell it. The movie starts with them ragging on this kid who's accidentally cut his own leg off while playing with the katana on camera.
Feeling bad, the kid's got tons of hits! Because he's famous, right? I mean, what more do you want? He's got more hits than I do. I'm kind of in a weird way jealous.
Wallace decides to take this more than a step further, flying out to Manitoba to interview him and exploit him in person. He arrives to find out that the kid actually committed suicide following the video going viral. Wallace is distraught, though not for the reason you'd hope. He's actually pissed that the kid killed himself before he was able to interview him.
Not fucking kidding you. Couldn't hold out for 2 more days. Selfish little peg-leg piece of shit.
Dehumanizing, yes, and that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the movie, and then begins the bizarre story by which it's based. Wallace finds an ad for the free room and board in exchange to listening to this dying old man's stories, his life stories. Dying old man, Howard Howe, is played by Michael Parks, who I know is the Spanish pimp from Kill Bill, but he's been in a whole lot of other stuff in his heyday. I watched an interview with some of the cast on what it was like to work with Michael Parks, and he's actually as interesting and full of stories as his character Howard Howe. He's done this and that, knew MLK, was there when Johnny Cash recorded that song, etc., according to Justin Long. If you ask the cast, Michael Parks is Howard Howe. So Wallace takes a drive to this man's home out on the Canadian prairie, and this is in hopes to reap something to talk about after things hit a deadly halt with the other guy. They sit, they have story time, they have tea, things are going good. Wallace passes the fuck out because Howard, in true villain fashion, spikes the tea. Wallace wakes up the next day in a wheelchair, finding one leg has been amputated off. At that point, that's fair and square. Yeah, like, you lose a leg, I lose a leg, and all is right with the world. Lest we forget there's supposed to be some becoming a walrus happening.
I am truly sorry for your loss.
The main theme in this film that is almost painfully obvious is the concept of humanity. Wallace's girlfriend, played by Genesis Rodriguez, has a few scenes specifically talking about this. Things like crying and caring for others is what separates us from the animals. And yeah, I guess, but it's like, has she ever met a dog before? I'm kidding. I actually liked her performance and would have rather seen more of her than Guy Lapointe. Oh, Guy Lapointe is the homicide detective. He's investigating a string of murders and crosses paths with Teddy and Allie when they learn that Wallace is in trouble. The guy is a bit erratic and kind of a caricature. He's based on the Canadian hockey player of the same name. Seems to be a lot of hockey references for Kevin Smith stuff. He's all over the place, pouring out a flask into his fast food drink, and they're like at a fast food restaurant. They're like, we should meet at this fast food restaurant and have lunch. But, Teddy and Allie are like, my friend's missing. I don't really have an appetite for that. And then he's like, suit yourself. And he's, drinking hard day in the middle afternoon. And he's crushing his burgers, like smashing them, discussing in detail extreme body mutilation casually over lunch.
And the legs are always amputated at the knees. arms are always fused to the body like a kind of a crucified T-Rex.
He's played by Johnny Depp. I knew there was something I didn't like about this guy. Anyway, Detective Key describes the killer as an animal, or inhumane. On the surface, Howard Howe seems to be having a pretty good human experience. He's lived an exciting life. He's well-spoken and charming. He lives in a mansion. He seems to have done well for himself. You'd hardly know there was something awful going on underneath. Probably my favorite part of the movie is when Howard and Wallace are having a fancy table dinner, and this is after he's just cut off his leg. That's it. He's only got one leg missing, and Wallace is just now realizing how fucked he is. He can't move his arms. He's yelling and crying, and he starts yelling for help, and Howard starts mimicking and mirroring his face, mocking him. That's when Wallace realized that that's kind of what he does for a living. Howard roofies Wallace again to cut some more stuff off. And during this, he starts talking about his upbringing. So we learn that he's something called a Duplessis orphan. And look this up because it's real and it's kind of freaky. There were 20,000 Canadian orphans misdiagnosed as mentally ill. And this was for tax benefit. In the 40s and 50s, the Canadian government at the time, they contributed more than double the subsidies on making mental institutions, or on making orphanages and building a mental institution instead. And that's where they put the orphans. But as expected, most of these kids grew up fucked up, including our boy Howard Howe. By that time, it's kind of established to the audience already that Howard has an affinity for walrus. He claims to have been saved by a specific walrus when he was lost at sea during his time in the Navy. He was the only survivor. He was pulled to shore on the deserted island by a walrus. To Howard, this experience is the only instance of kindness he's ever had in his life. And this is after this backstory of consisting mostly of exploitation and sexual abuse.
Cute.
Well, cute is for Chinese babies, Mr. Brighton. But my walrus companion was beautiful. I have never known such a fulfilling friendship with anyone.
I've only known humans to be an ocean of shit, he says. The walrus is sort of like his guardian angel. He reveals that shortly after being rescued, he had to kill and eat the walrus so as not to starve to death. So now, he is survived by guilt and being a serial killer. He uses parts from multiple victims to create a walrus suit, sewing one person inside, arms, legs, and tongue removed, left alive merely to act like a walrus. This is how Howard copes with killing who he considers his only companion in life.
Until now. Yes. Man is a savage animal, Mr. Brighton.
The big reveal. The big reveal of Wallace waking up in that walrus suit. In the suit made of flesh. It's made of flesh from murder victims. This actually happens pretty early on in the film. And that might not have been the best move, but it's a move I can get behind because storytelling is really more about what becomes of the characters after crazy shit happens, right? So there's some torturing of Wallace into fully becoming a walrus. I don't know if I'm saying Wallace or walrus or like I'm mixing them up. So the main dude's name is Wallace, and that's like fun foreshadowing. It's so obvious that it's funny, but also a tongue twister. Anyway, he's being forced in the water to swim with no limbs and forced to eat fish with no tongue. And he really can only communicate by like bellowing and wailing. It's really creepy and disturbing. As if things weren't weird enough, Howard eventually confronts Wallace wearing his own matching walrus suit. He's made a few of these. He says that at this stage of going complete walrus, we have to fight to the death. And I guess it's really just this laugh out loud moment, because at that point it's just ridiculous. You know, like, oh, I can't take this guy seriously. He's so silly.
Either you go full walrus, or this.
This is in a way supposed to be Howard giving his walrus friend from the past another chance to kill him. And during the fight, Wallace's animal instincts seem to kick in, and he stabs Howard with his brand new tusks, which are made from his leg bones. I forget. Femur? I don't know. In the end, Allie, Teddy, and the detective eventually find the enclave, and they're horrified by the sight of Wallace's disfigurement. It jumps to a year later. Allie and Teddy go to visit him in this obscure animal sanctuary, and they even bring him a fish. I generally like when there's no resolve at the end of a horror film. That's always seemed most realistic to me and terrifying. No resolve. Most of the time it's the killer's still out there, or in this case, he's gone, but there's still dread and trauma to be dealt with, both within and between the characters. The way I see it, Wallace seems to have decided against any reconstructive surgery. It's a whole year later and he looks exactly the same. It's the same crazy ass suit, and he lives at a small wildlife sanctuary as a walrus. You've seen how they fixed that guy's face, the guy that was attacked by a bear. We have the technology to at least make kind of like a Stephen Hawking type recovery, surely. We can rebuild this dude. Okay, now I feel sorry for him. This is covering way more than his hypothetical dues. Why live like this? Is it guilt? Maybe now he believes that this happening to him is the only way he could have realized how he was treating others in life. Figuratively, anyway. Maybe he's insane now, and he was mutilated into submission to Howard's idea that the walrus is far more evolved than any man, and he owes it to him to continue living this way. I wasn't really a fan of the numerous flashback scenes. That's the only thing that confused my family when I was watching it with them. Yes, I watched this with my family. I did end up enjoying this a lot more than I expected to. I found the message to be straightforward, and I appreciated that there wasn't a lot of archaic references that needed Googling to be understood. Some films can be kind of inaccessible that way. I really liked the cast. The cast was so good. The movie was scary. The movie was fun. I think we give this 2 thumbs up. I was thinking how I would rate films if I was starting to make more of these reviews, and I think this is something I haven't seen yet. Maybe like 1 thumb is like, 2 thumbs is love, and we're giving this movie 2 thumbs up.